Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you to the official start of our new Chaos series. Not exactly sure what the Archons, the AA alliteration is going to be for this series, but this is going to be the Chaos section of the channel, where we go in depth into the much maligned and neglected chaos side of 40k lore. And of course, we will be beginning with Nurgle himself, the god Nurgle, the entity that is the Grandfather. So, let's start off with his origins and, of course, the god himself. Nurgle's theoretical origin, at least one of the best interpretations that we have of it, is that he is the element of entropy. His physical form, or his manifested thought form within the warp, came into being at the very beginning of anything, because before there is anything, there is nothing, and Nurgle, before he has any true powers, is an embodiment of entropy, a lack of change, and a true absence of dynamism within the galaxy would create an entity such as Nurgle. Not active, but rather passive and dormant before anything is there to be the opposite of what he is. It's a very interesting chicken and egg problem. If you have a god who represents the opposite of change in reality, when nothing is changing in reality because nothing exists in reality, does that god exist? And I would argue yes, making Nurgle the oldest of any of the Chaos gods, likely by a very, very short period of time and or untime. Go take a look at my other Chaos videos if you'd like to go further into that can of worms that is the birth of the Chaos Gods. But in the meantime, let's look at some of his holy icons. Now, Nurgle, like a lot of the other Chaos Gods, has his holy things and his things that he prefers. His holy number is 7, his preferred color is greens, browns, and bilious yellows. He is a big fan of growing things. This includes plants, fungus, trees, forests, mosses, and any number of other clinging and growing things. He's also a big fan of bells, chimes, and other light percussion instruments of that type, and also flutes in addition to that, and other things such as bagpipes. And, of course, his big love are decay and recycling creatures. So, animals or living plants that feed off of the decay of other things and help with the natural recycling of nature. Parasites and bacteria, of course, mosses, lichens, any type of decomposer, slugs, flies, lots of things like that are all right up Nurgle's alley, including parasites in some cases. So, what are the lists of titles for this god? Well, of course, we have Nurgle. We have the Ur-Father. The Ur-Father is an older name in reference to the father of disease or plague, or in general just hardship, the father of hardship. The Rot-Father, the Grandfather, and of course Nurgle as the compassionate grandfather figure is a very common motif within his worship, so adding in Grandpapa Nurgle, Grandfather Nurgle, he's very much a patriarchal, compassionate figure within his worship. Another title is the Torrent. Now, the Torrent is a bit of an odd one, but it is actually a reference to Nurgle's deluge, which is a particular curse that Nurgle has that causes it to rain plagues, quite literally, from the sky in a great torrent of suffering and disease. The next, of course, is Father Plague, or the Father of Plagues, and the Gardener. Now, Father Plague is quite obvious, but the Gardener is a little bit less so. Within Nurgle's lore, his realm, the Garden of Nurgle, is not a metaphorical concept. It is a literal, granted, probably in need of some maintenance, but a constructed garden. It is designed to be beautiful and expansive greenery, and Nurgle and his followers take care to actually conserve, take care of, and cultivate his garden in a specific way that pleases him. So, referring to him as the gardener and him working in his garden is often a motif that you will see from Nurgle. Now, what are the descriptors of Nurgle and his tenets? Now, these are things that either he likes, he intends to spread, or he embodies religiously. The first one, and one of the most consistent ones, is despair. Naturally, despair is an opposite of hope. When mankind has simply been broken and can no longer see a brighter future, that is where Nurgle tends to slip in. Now, naturally, that is the exact opposite of Tzeentch, who is Nurgle's opposite number. When Nurgle existed, Tzeentch naturally also came into existence because once the nothingness changes, something has progressed, and thus the god of change comes into being. That means that they are the two oldest gods, and they are born/created near simultaneously. But we'll get to that in a bit with direct foes. Despair is, of course, the narrow wedge of Nurgle's tenets. He has much pleasure from the suffering and despair of others, but it isn't for no reason, and despair is more of a mindset. It doesn't necessarily require that you suffer, it just requires that you have given up hope. The next big thing is natural cycles of life and death. Now, this is particularly natural cycles. It is not supposed to be something that is artificial, and it's certainly not something that is imposed. It is supposed to be consistent, intentional, and in line with nature and or the natural world. Plants going through birth, death, and regrowth cycles, any type of life cycles for animals, or people, for that matter, growing up, being young, expanding your ability to do things, and then growing old, decaying, and dying. A natural cycle that Nurgle likes to latch onto, and is very representative of a lot of his growth and tenets. Matter of fact, it is actually a large part of the next tenet, which is growth and decay. There are two sides to the Nurgle's addiction to cycles. On one hand, he really likes when the cycle starts over. Essentially, the idea is that if things reach a zenith, or the top of the bell curve, they must then come full circle. If at one point you are growing and being fecund and virulent and expanding, you must then collapse, fade, decay, and recycle, regrow, and be reborn. Now, these cycles, the two of them, life and death, growth and decay, and the despair that comes with them, are all part of the greater concept of the Nurgle cycle. The Nurgle cycle is not something that he wants you to be upset with. It is something that he wants you to come to fully understand and embrace. And that, of course, leads to our next part, acceptance. Acceptance of the cycle. Now, naturally, if you think despair is something that we as humans naturally avoid. Despair is what leads us down the path of many negative and destructive activities. That's not really the point. The point of Nurgle's despair and the point of the cycles is not to simply want out by any means necessary. It is to accept the cycle. It is the idea that, well, if my life is going to go up and down the bell curve over and over and over again, I'm going to do the absolute best that I can with that bell curve and improve my ability to resist the cycle, not by destroying the cycle, but rather by improving myself and, in Nurgle's eyes, bringing yourself closer to his tenets. If you do not work against the cycle, if you don't try to escape it, to subvert it, or to destroy it, you are following what he wants. He wants you to become stronger, using the cycle as a challenge rather than an obstacle. And the first part of that is acceptance. It's accepting that the rat race of life, the cycles of growth, death, and decay, are not just going to go away one day. They're not just going to disappear. It's not going to get easier. You're going to have to accept it and get on with it so that you can become stronger. And what is stronger in terms of Nurgle? It isn't just survival, it's fecundity. It is latching onto the cycle and being able to maximize your profit from it, or maximize the potential of the cycle. Nurgle wants you to view something like your workday, where you go through certain highs and lows of your day, and you travel this constant cycle over and over. He wants you to look at it as an opportunity for growth. Literally a growth mindset, this concept of, well, instead of seeing it as a constant rat race or a hamster wheel that I'm stuck on and I want to do anything to escape, instead, this hamster wheel is making me more powerful. The day that I can ignore the exhaustion and the despair of being on the hamster wheel and truly get the most out of it, Well, then I've succeeded in becoming fecund. I have increased my ability to resist the horrors of this reality and the cycles that Nurgle throws at me, and I will receive my reward. What is the reward after this long, bumpy, miserable, nihilistic road? Well, it's a Nurgle's mercy. Nurgle's mercy is a complex subject, but it's one that we will get to when we get to the gifts of the grandfather. And Nurgle's mercy is one of the only genuine blessings that is basically with no downsides, because it is one that you have to earn. There is no quick way to get to Nurgle's mercy unless you are already an active worshipper, at which point he's still going to challenge you and make sure that you are a true worshipper, but it's not nearly as hard as it would be for somebody who's just being introduced to Nurgle for the first time. So, Nurgle's mercy is generally almost entirely upsides, mostly because it is so hard to receive the grandfather's recognition and mercy. His realm, the Garden of Nurgle, a beautiful putrid swamp full of both undead creatures and living foliage, stretches out in a massive swath of the warp itself. Now, the Garden of Nurgle and the various structures within it can change based on interpretation. Again, go look at my warp video if you want a little bit more detail on the origin of the gods and the realms. But suffice it to say that the garden is not protected, at least a majority of it is not protected by walls or parapets or protections. It's rather protected by how insanely polluted and deadly the entirety of the garden is. The trees have mouths and tentacles and wish to eat you. The flies are tiny demons that will lay eggs inside of your eyeballs. There are literally tens of millions of demons literally living within and inside of the ground, the trees, the blossoms and the flowers, the fruit, etc., that will drop out to protect the garden should it be under threat. It is very much a hive mind of active defensive units, much more so than the other realms of the gods which rely upon sorcery, structure, or organized impossible geometry in order to keep you out. You're allowed to walk into Nurgle's garden, you just really won't be coming out the same person. Direct foes and additional notes. Now, Nurgle is kind of interesting as a god. As mentioned, his origin is pretty unique, and even though he is at odds with Tzeentch and Khorne, he's not nearly as much of an enemy of the other gods as, for example, Khorne's hatred of Slaanesh and Tzeentch. Khorne's hatred of Slaanesh and Tzeentch goes absolutely to the bone, completely unwilling to work together on basically anything. Even in the most extreme circumstances, Khorne and Tzeentch would probably have a hard time even trying to work together, and Slaanesh and Khorne would never work together, ever. Khorne would literally rather fail at what he's doing, probably, than team up with Slaanesh for a majority of things. Nurgle, not nearly so hating, and he can't be. It's actually in his nature, with the concept of mercy and the concept of the cycles, that he can't really be that hateful of the other gods. Even Tzeentch, who is his diametrical opposite, he understands that there is a cycle between them as well, and he's a god of cycles, so he can't particularly hate that Tzeentch always comes along to change the entropy that he's managed to establish, because, well, that's natural. That's what has to happen. And Nurgle, of course, sees everything in terms of cycles, where Tzeentch sees the future and intends towards things that will be infinite and multiplicative in effect. Nurgle just sees, well, I've had my day in the sun, I've reached the top of my growth cycle, essentially, the maximum fecundity has been reached. It's only natural that I now have to decay away, and I will rate and I will be stronger next cycle. And next cycle will always come. One of the most powerful things about Nurgle is that he cannot be gotten rid of. Removing everything from an area simply makes Nurgle stronger because he is a god of that nothingness, that emptiness, that constancy, rather than change or progress. So there is like an unspoken understanding between Zeech and Nurgle. However, Khorne and Nurgle do not get along very often. Khorne, of course, is very much against a lot of the things that Nurgle is for, including patience. Khorne has no patience. Khorne does not have any respect for those who are willing to self-discipline to the point of willingly backing down. Khorne does not have that concept, and thus he would arguably consider Nurgle a coward, and alternatively, he would simply consider him lazy. Which I guess is reasonable. You have a god built like the average League of Legends player. Yeah, I could see how Khorne, the like 6'5" Macho Man Randy Savage wannabe, is probably going to see him as lazy. You know, go to the gym, nerd. And then there is the other hand. Nurgle and Slaanesh do not get along. Now, this isn't necessarily because Nurgle has any particular love or appreciation for Slaanesh. He doesn't even really have an understanding with Slaanesh like he does with Zeech. It's more that they are both mutually exclusive. Slaanesh is disgusted by Nurgle. Absolutely disgusted by Nurgle. Everything about him is a unsexy, disgusting, hideous amoeba that is absolutely below anything that Slaanesh could consider worthy of even recognition. And even with that, we know, Nurgle doesn't really have anything against most of the gods. He has one thing against Slaanesh. Slaanesh wants Isha. And Isha is the Eldar goddess who is currently acting as Nurgle's wife. So, effectively, it's a bit of a truce, but it's just barely, and he's certainly not as willing to work with Slaanesh, and Slaanesh would never consider working with Nurgle, so they have kind of a live and let live situation there, unlike with the other gods, where Nurgle is much more happy to throw down. There is also the opposite side of that if Slaanesh decides to mess with Nurgle, Nurgle has a very, very strong protective instinct, and you will notice this in his familial and caring compassion. There is also a violent protective urge. His entire realm is based off of almost the idea of an immune system protecting itself only when it's under threat. Kind of like, well, if you cut back one branch, 10 of them are going to grow and attack you. The same thing applies with Slaanesh. Every time that Slaanesh threatens to take back Isha, Nurgle about blows a blood vessel in his head and has a little tantrum inside of the garden. So he doesn't really like to do that, but he is very, very protective of his wife for reasons that we will talk about later. So, Nurgle's demons. Well, I say later, right now. The theory of the loving family or the commune. Nurgle genuinely does see his demons and his followers as family. And it's a concept and really a worldview or a religious concept that is basically absent amongst all of the other gods. Khorne may view you as a valid warrior and a worthy soldier in his ranks, but you're not a friend. You're not a battle brother in any sense, and any camaraderie is built out of mutual respect and honor to a lesser degree, and not really friendship. Slaanesh, it's not a loving family. The diametrical pairing of pain and pleasure naturally implies that you are willing to inflict pain on a person. Nurgle does not like to willingly inflict pain once you have joined the family, and you'll notice that he's actually quite protective of the family, unlike Slaanesh, who will gladly punish or throw out individuals into the cold. Nurgle is about forgiveness, about mercy, and Slaanesh is absolutely not about either of those things. She is, in fact, very covetous, possessive, and jealous. So, yeah, absolutely not. And even Zeech, or, well, I should say particularly Zeech, there is nothing loving about the corporate scenario that you are in as a Zeech demon. There is basically diametrical opposites between how Zeech sees his followers as useful pawns at the very best of times, and expendable chaff at the worst of times, that is practically a diametrical opposite to Nurgle and the loving family idea. Now, of course, the question here is, who is part of the family? Well, it's usually Nurgle's own demons and his very, very corrupted mortal servants, those who have proven themselves to be friends of the cycle and users of the cycle, usually the blessed and the chosen of Nurgle, who are considered in the actual family. And there is love there. There's actual familial appreciation and communal understanding of, one white blood cell is damaged or the host is wounded. The rest of the family will effectively step in to protect them. And that brings us to Isha, and where she fits into Nurgle's demons. Now, Isha is the Eldar goddess of, well, a lot of different things, but mostly of healing. And during the birth of Slaanesh, Slaanesh was very close to devouring Isha, as she had many of the other Eldar gods, until she got the absolute tar beaten out of her by Nurgle. Now, why did Nurgle do this, and why does Nurgle currently have Isha in his realm? There are a lot of different theories, and there are a couple that make more sense to me. The first thing that we have to think about is, what is the actual relationship between the Eldar gods and the gods of Chaos? And to really identify this, all you have to do is look at the relationship between Keela-Mencha Cain and Khorne. Keela-Mencha Cain, or Cain, is a god of murder. Khorne is a god of violence, battle, and also murder. They share a realm or a domain in their worship and their effects upon the mortal realms. This is why Khorne actually fights Slaanesh to try and protect Cain's soul. And then, of course, this logic would apply that if they are at least willing to fight to protect one another because they share a domain, why does Nurgle, a god of plague and disease and cycles, want to protect a goddess of healing? Well, the natural follow-up would be they must share some domain as well. Now, it's unclear exactly the relationship between Cain and Khorne, as much as it is unclear the relationship between Isha and Nurgle. Now, the classic depiction, well, there's two classic depictions. One of them is that Isha is welcomed into the family and is a loving mother to the demons and is a friendly individual who is, not necessarily grateful for Nurgle's protection, but at least willing to help him out in a way by basically tasting the poor guy's cooking. His plagues literally being tested by her before being released onto mortal populations. And then, of course, as a goddess of healing, she helps to heal that. But the other side of that is the one that has become more popular, which is the idea that Nurgle took Isha for specifically personal or selfish ends, protecting her from Slaanesh to use as his pox fulcrum, aka keeping her chained up in a cage and feeding her, force-feeding her poison until he can figure out what the effects of his newest brew will be. Now, these two interpretations clash with a lot of things. One, why would Nurgle use Isha purely for the use of a pox fulcrum when he could use basically any other number of go-betweens or immaterial creatures? There are many different creatures, including the greater demons of other gods, who could theoretically serve the same exact purpose as Isha, and technically would also be easier for Nurgle to keep a hold of, because God against God is not nearly as powerful as God against greater demon. So, why Isha? Why would he pick Isha? Why would he go out of his way to fight one of these incredibly dangerous god-on-god conflicts personally at a time where he generally doesn't tend to do that a lot of the time? Now, here's the general theory that I go forward with. Isha and he share a domain. What is that domain? The domain that they share is effectively mercy. It is relief. And since that's a thing that's often stripped away from Nurgle, people don't view him as a god of mercy. Like, they maybe understand compassion, they don't really apply mercy. The whole point of Nurgle's suffering and despair dynamic is that it has a converse side in the cycle, which is his mercy. And now, considering that he's a god of plague, what is mercy? Mercy is a cure. Effectively, Nurgle selected Isha and uses Isha, willingly or not, because she allows him to create a skeleton key to each of his own plagues. So he can always effectively complete the cycle of suffering to acceptance to blessing or mercy. With having this constant skeleton key, he can effectively control and be more effective as a chaos god. But is it out of self-interest? Is it out of pure malice towards Isha? Is it out of hatred towards mankind? Is Isha doing this secretly? And that's the thing I really don't understand. People are always like, oh yeah, Isha is quietly whispering the cures to plagues behind Nurgle's back. One, if she's a genuine prisoner, she just wouldn't be able to do that. Two, that's what Nurgle wants. If she is secretly sending the cures to plagues to mankind, why? Nurgle is the one who gives them mercy at the end of the day, and his cures are effectively the same as hers, giving you the ability to resist the disease just in time to bring in a new one to make you even more resistant. So she's effectively playing along as another part in the cycle of Nurgle's worship. So why? If she is genuinely angry or malicious towards Nurgle, there's absolutely no reason to serve that function. She could just refuse or even just say something incorrect and make the suffering even worse, making it harder for Nurgle to get his worshippers out of her. So why do this? Well, I subscribe to a particular theory with Isha. Two things are true. One, Isha is very much crossed with Nurgle. Effectively, they are not in a blissful domestic situation. They are more accurately in a, let's say, a loveless marriage. Isha cannot leave Nurgle's garden, or else Slaanesh will attempt to devour her. And Nurgle cannot really let go of his poxfulcrum because, whether or not he realizes it, she is very helpful to his activities, and also she is a useful member of the family. At this point, being this long in the warp and consuming so many of Nurgle's plagues, it is quite possible that she has actually become, at least slightly, corrupted. And this is actually borne out by another piece of evidence that we have in Nurgle's conduct. Nurgle doesn't show off Isha. Nurgle doesn't waggle her in the face of Slaanesh, and Nurgle certainly does not hold her around as a happy captive to be shown to others. In fact, it's the exact opposite. He's insanely protective of Isha, to the point where one of the only things that can actually get Nurgle upset, like genuinely angry, is a threat against his wife, so to speak. So why? why would this point to the idea that it isn't just a captive dynamic? Well, the main three things are: Nurgle's incredibly protective of Isha. Isha, at this point, is serving a role within the cycle for Nurgle, so they are working together no matter what the dynamic is. And the third one is, very simply, there's a continuation of Isha's life as a poxfulcrum. If she was completely destroyed, or there was no use to having her anymore, Nurgle would probably not keep using her over and over again. So, again, it's a complicated theory, but the idea is essentially if you look at the relationship that Khorne and Kain had, and you compare it to the relationship that people say Nurgle and Isha have, it doesn't make any sense. It simply doesn't add up. He would not be nearly as protective if he was just using her as a tool. It is not natural for Nurgle to be covetous, jealous, or petty, so it doesn't make sense why he would keep getting upset when Isha is threatened, because if she was just a tool, or not a member of the family, he really wouldn't care as per a lot of his lore, but he does, so the exact opposite must be true. She must be of some value to the commune or family beyond that of a simple tool, because again, Nurgle's not big on brutal slavery. He's not a slave driver. He wants people to join in his family, willingly or no, but still to join with him and be effective, and it is pretty clear from the lore that Isha is being an effective part of the cycle. So that's a little bit of food for thought and some elucidation upon the Isha controversy as it was. Again, I don't think they're I don't think they're a loving family by any means, but I certainly think that the dynamic between them is more complicated than people make it out to be. And then we get to the actual demons of Nurgle. Sorry, yeah, I've been like getting that theory down for a very, very long time. So, minor demons, mid-rank demons, exalted demons, and greater demons. The minor demons of Nurgle are Nurglings, which are up here, Plague Bearers, these boys, also referred to as the Willing Reborn, and Demonic Flies. Now, demonic flies are kind of the easiest ones to go with. Demon flies are everywhere within Nurgle's realm. They live within and spawn from many of his demons. And while they are not all that dangerous, they have two things that are particularly nasty about them. One, they are not natural flies, and they do not respond to things like chemical defoliants or anti-bug things or even smoke and stuff like that. They can be destroyed or warded away with various religious icons, but they can carry disease, which is kind of the main point of them. They are designed as a way to both be a vector for Nurgle's plagues to spread from his demons to other creatures, but they are also a very effective way of shielding his creatures from ranged firepower. Yes, a solid cloud of flies swallowing up an enemy position can quite easily prevent them from being able to see and attack Nurgle's demons, which is often a common thing. They will have a debuff for enemy ranged attacks because there are simply so many flies swarming around their position. And these are, again, not natural flies, they are demon flies. Nurglings are adorable. They are roughly the size of a soccer ball, and they have little angry faces and tiny horns. Nurglings are not really representative of much. They are much more of a walking comedy act, a bubble of plague. They range in temperament from adorable and playful to semi-serious and like self-aggrandizing, like they pretend to be more important than they are, and almost all of them have this kind of impish streak where they are absolutely a-okay with causing mischief, and some of them can be downright mean-spirited, but amongst many of the demons in the 41st millennium, Nurglings are some of the ones who are at least a lot more friendly than some others. They have no schemes, they have no real higher thought, they are quite head empty as far as most creatures go. Now, there are some, like familiars, who are a little bit more intelligent, but most Nurglings are just here for the fun of it, and they are often considered pets or lesser little brothers and sisters for the rest of the loving Nurgle family. Plague Bearers I often refer to as the Willing Reborn. Now, the Willing Reborn is a concept that is a result of some differences with how Nurgle creates his demons. Namely, it is to say that Plague Bearers are the result of a person who died accepting Nurgle's forgiveness or Nurgle's mercy. And they are reborn directly as a demon in the Garden of Nurgle. And that demon is a plague bearer, and that is one-to-one with the person in reality. Their soul, essentially when they accept the mercy of Nurgle, is earmarked and stamped to become a demon, and then when they die, their consciousness and soul is transferred into the warp, and directly into one of the trees or plants in Nurgle's garden, and then they are dropped out as a plague bearer. Now, again, this is just a theory, and it runs very unique to Nurgle. It certainly makes sense. Somebody who accepts Nurgle's blessing and then passes on anyway, someone who's made it through the gauntlet of the cycle, has improved themselves, and has accepted the teachings of the grandfather, it makes sense that they're not just cast aside. And this is often a thing with other gods, that even their most loyal followers, once they die, are still devoured by demons. It would make sense why Nurgle's followers, they would be accepted. You pass the test. You pass probably the hardest possible test for a mortal to pass, because it doesn't require you to be outwardly violent or to give in to weakness and pleasure-seeking, or even to be ambitious beyond your wildest dreams and improve your own personal situation. No. It requires you to stay as you are, to be as you are and to perform impossible feats while remaining within your physical means and limitations, while remaining within the cycle. And that is hard. Very, very difficult to do to the level of requirement that Nurgle actually wants from you. And it makes sense why people who actually manage that very difficult task will be guaranteed a quote-unquote seat in heaven as reincarnated into a plague bearer. So, again, some might be made like that. It's arguable, but I think it's also an indicator that that might be the case due to the fact that the Plague Bearers are some of the only demons who are genuinely solemn and relatively down to earth. Now, there are some who are very funny, there's sloppity bile pipers and all those kind of guys. Leaders and units of that kind, those might be either unique humans or they might be custom-made demons that Nurgle himself has created. Because the humans are a lot more dour and serious and very chop, 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 go, go, go in comparison to the other demons. They're much more task-oriented because they are, of course, born from the willing reborn who have a job to do because they've come back and received their eternal reward. So it makes sense why they are a little bit more dour, a little bit more serious, and a little bit more goal-oriented than the rest of their brothers, like the Nurglings, for example. And that is the end of our minor demons. On to our mid-rank demons. The big ones here are rotflies. Rotflies are kind of gross. They are enormous. They are a little bit like a mix of roving scavenger harvester and giant wasp. They have stingers and big old sucker mouths that they use to rip people's heads off and then generate grenades with them. And they are very low-order intelligence creatures. This is another thing that's notable with Nurgle, and technically with a few other of the gods, but very, very outspoken with Nurgle, is that some of his demons have very low animalistic intelligence, and then some are downright equal to human intelligence. So, for example, Nurglings are not all that smart. Rotflies, very unintelligent. Plague toads, middle, and then beasts of Nurgle, also middle. Unlike a lot of other demons who have actual abilities to think and reason even if they can't speak, Nurgle has a lot of more animalistic demons. That is not to say that they are acting like animals, it means that they are just not all that sentient or sapient, and I think this has to do with the fact that Nurgle is so related to life and to entropy. The idea that these recycler beasts simply have a function within the garden, and thus they are his demons in this way. Things like beasts of Nurgle or rotflies or plague toads, well, they have a job. They fit into a natural environment within the warp, and even though they aren't custom-made demons designed in his image, intentionally made for vanity or personal glory, or even warfare, a lot of the Nurgle mid-rank demons are not even really designed for warfare. They're more just partially decent as warriors because of what they are. Plague toads, for example, they're really not great, like, as demon warriors, as great beasts of the Immaterium. It's a frog. I mean, it's a big frog. It's a pretty large frog, but it's not granted any particular protections or weaponry by being a mid-rank demon. Rotflies are quite dangerous, and they're a little bit mean-spirited when they're driven on by plague bearers, but again, it's a fly. It's a natural being incarnated into a warp version of itself in order to fit the environment rather than fit into an army list. And this kind of makes sense as to why Nurgle isn't really so concerned about winning every battle. That's not the point. If Nurgle is going to win the battle, it's because he's reached the zenith of his cycle and is at his most powerful. At that point, it doesn't matter how his demons are or are not fit for combat. They're going to be so strong because of his natural power that they will be able to overwhelm any enemy by sheer numbers and fatness in many points. Plague toads are adorable. Sorry, moving on. Rotflies are great. They can be ridden by other guys. We'll talk about plague drones in a second. Plague toads. Plague toads are really big toads. They are essentially just frog. interesting piece of lore about the plague toads and a theory that I have about them. Plague toads are one of the few creatures that Nurgle seems to enjoy hunting. Now, of course, Nurgle being so compassionate and obsessed with forgiveness and cycles and almost a certain level of reciprocity and respecting the concept of nature and the garden and progress, or sorry, not progress, but the process of natural environments, why does he hunt the plague toads? Why does he go out and want to squish them for fun? It specifically says that he squishes them for fun because they make a loud noise that he likes the sound of. Why? Why does he have this kind of miserable, squishy, self-congratulatory, or relaxing practice? Why do this? I think that it might have to do with the nature of the plague toads. The plague toads are natural predators. Now, rot flies can eat multiple things, including the souls of the damned, and also various pieces of the garden which are natural. Plague toads are obligate predators that don't have the ability to fly or travel far outside the garden. Beasts of Nurgle can travel far outside the garden. And they are also different in another way. Plague toads are obligate predators, which means that they are effectively having to feed on other demons in order to sustain themselves. Which means that Nurgle may see a certain correct amount of reciprocity by going out and effectively thinning out the herd. Now, in our own day, we often have a thing where we cull certain predators at certain times of year in order to keep the ecology of an area in balance. For example, if there are a lot of wolves in an area and you need to deal with them killing off livestock or various other creatures or even threatening people, you go out and you kill a bunch of the predators. That might be exactly what Nurgle is doing. On top of the fact that squishing the toads is satisfying to do, he might also find it correct because, well, the toads feed directly on other demons, and he could view that as a threat to the family's structure and the ecological formation of the garden if they are not culled or at least brought down to a certain level. And so that might be the reason why the plague toads are a particular fascination of him when he goes out hunting, or more accurately, stomping on them. And then finally, Beasts of Nurgle. Beasts of Nurgle come in a lot of different forms. They have various different depictions over the years, and I like basically all of them. Beasts of Nurgle are puppy dogs. And I can't say it in any other way. They're essentially large, bipedal or quadrupedal slug-like creatures, covered in tentacles and spewing orifices of various kinds, that want nothing more than to effectively play fetch or give people licks. They are very, very affectionate, often completely indiscriminately so, and they are friendly to the point where it's kind of sad to consider how most of them really don't understand that the people that they're playing with don't want to play. And very much like any puppy dog that gets shot when it tries to give you a kiss in the face, it doesn't really like that and doesn't appreciate it. And as a result, a lot of their lives are kind of brutish and sad. But Beasts of Nurgle, as much as they do want to play with people, and they are puppy dogs with the ability to spread plague, they are also absolutely foul. They are covered in acidic slime, noxious fumes, pus, and pseudopods filled with disease, not to mention a tongue that literally drips corrosive acid. Yeah, they're a little bit cursed in that way, that they want to be friendly and they want to play with you, but at the same time, you can't really give them the hug that you want to give them, unless you are also a follower of Nurgle. I very much want to imagine that the Plague Bearers like to play fetch with the Beasts of Nurgle, but that is much more of a headcanon thing than a canon thing. And that is the end of our mid-rank demons. Again, a lot of mid-wits in the mid-rank demons. We're not looking at anyone who's a particular strategic genius yet, and believe me, we won't even get there until later gods, because Nurgle's, again, not really all that concerned with building an army list. He's building a family. And a garden. So, moving on to the exalted demons, we have two types. Plague drones. Plague drones are interesting. They are plague bearers, or exalted plague bearers, riding rot flies. Now, that might not seem weird to anyone here, but remember, Nurgle is not a slave driver. Nurgle is not creating a hierarchy amongst many of his demons. Nurgle really does see them as a commune where they all have a purpose to play and an ecological niche to sit in. So why is it okay for a plague drone or for a plague bearer to ride a rotfly as a plague drone? Why are they given permission to do that, and why are they given this dominion over a fly? As that's just a fellow family member. So why? Well, I think it very much has to do with this exaltation. That's the main thing. The only way that you can gain dominion over your fellow demons with Nurgle is if he gives you express permission. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply with minor demons, but at least when you're talking about mating a mid-rank and a minor demon in a plague drone, there's some amount of recognition that it's a necessity. There's the idea that, well, our demons are very slow. The only fast option that we have, and the only flyer that we have, are rotflies, so okay. It's essentially a permission. It is an understanding, perhaps even a mutual understanding, though rotflies are not very intelligent, that the plague bearer is very important to Nurgle and has proven themselves very useful, or at least capable, and they deserve a mount or a steed. Now, if you know anything about horses, there's an understanding that if you're afraid around a horse, or if you're nervous around a horse, it's not going to respect you, and it may even not let you ride it. Common thing we see in, like, dragon riding tropes. It's like, oh, it can smell your fear, and it won't like you. Very similar thing here, except it's less of fear and lack of resolve, and more of a, well, if you're not an important enough part of the garden, you're not going to be able to get onto a rotfly. Rotflies are quite strong, and they could easily overpower a plague bearer. So there has to be some understanding or mutual respect between the rotfly and the plague bearer. At some level. Again, rotflies are not very smart, so perhaps it is even some pheromone or sub-mental understanding that Nurgle gives to the plague bearer that permits them to mount the rotfly and become a plague drone. Again, more theoretical, but it's just an interesting thing that this is one of the only demons where a minor demon has the ability to mount a mid-rank demon and essentially have a servant within the commune. The commune that is Nurgle's hosts, of course. And then the next one is a much more standard one, heralds. Heralds tend to be plague bearers of note. Generally, they're denoted by being fatter. Common thing with Nurgle is that the bigger you are, the more important you are. And that's why, great unclean ones look like League players. But heralds are often so heavy and with such a large pot belly that they can no longer move around on their own, and they will also often have a mount of some kind. Sometimes it's a rotfly. More often than not, it's a modified plague toad, beast of Nurgle, or a palanquin drawn by many Nurglings. And again, here, it's that idea that being exalted in Nurgle's commune, or Nurgle's host, has nothing to do with making you better. All it has to do with is making you able to have an understanding with other demons of Nurgle and having them help you out directly, or at least second themselves to you in a way that isn't natural in most of the perfectly balanced ecological web of Nurgle's garden. So, again, that idea that once you get to a certain level of importance or relationship to Nurgle himself, he allows you certain privileges over others within the commune. Again, it's probably via mutual understanding, but sometimes it might not be, because of course some things are simply too important to be lost because people don't want to cooperate. And then finally, greater demons. Now, I have personal theories with all of the greater demons. There are many named greater demons in Warhammer 40k. However, I hold to it that each god only has access to their holy numbers worth of greater demons at any one time. So for Nurgle, his number is 7. which means that he has four major great unclean ones. So these would be exalted great unclean ones, the upper level, the very strong ones, ones that mirror Nurgle's power, like Kugath and others of his ilk, Scabiathrax, etc. And then there are three minor ones. Essentially, they are great unclean ones who haven't quite reached that level of importance yet, but are getting there. And the embodiment that the great unclean ones have, or how they relate to Nurgle, is they are his priests, quite literally. Whereas the other gods use their greater demons for all sorts of different applications and purposes within the warp, the great unclean ones are literally obligate priests. They're not really frontline combatants. You wouldn't summon a great unclean one because you wanted a great foe vanquished, even though they could do that. That's not really why they're there. The Great Unclean One is much more of a spiritual icon connecting you directly with the realms of the warp than he is a monstrous duelist or battler designed to beat up enemies. They're fat, slow, green, doughy boys who are more famous for being able to resist Titan-grade weaponry than they are for their swordsmanship skills. It's really not the point. They're much more priests than they are warriors, spreading the word, the influence, and of course the garden's denizens into real space. And a good example of how they are used in that way, and a good example of Nurgle's mentality with his demons, is in Kugath himself. Now, of course, as many of us know, Kugath Plaguefather was once a Nurgling. And, unfortunately, this very, very interested Nurgling was sitting on Nurgle's shoulder one day. Another great example of Nurgle simply accepting anyone into his realm. Khorne would not simply let one of his bloodletters sit on his shoulder, and Slaanesh would certainly not let one of her demonettes just chill out on her throne. Nurgle, on the other hand, likes an audience when he cooks. And Kugath gets so overwhelmed with the scent of Nurgle's latest dinner that he falls into the pot and devours the entirety of the brew by himself, bulging up and emptying the cauldron of one of Nurgle's, theoretically, most powerful diseases yet. And, unlike any other god, say Khorne stripping off, the wings of a bloodthirster who betrayed him, or Slaanesh tossing her greater demons into time out when they displease her in some minor way, or Tzeentch just dumping Kairos' face into a black hole because he wants to know what the future looks like, Kugath is not punished for his transgression, and it is a transgression. He has deep remorse. He's incredibly sad that he's done this, but Nurgle sees this as an opportunity. Kugath is irreparably changed by the devouring of so much of Nurgle's power, and he becomes a leading greater demon, not because of some capability or ability that he has, but rather by the sheer fact that he has become more powerful. The fact that he's able to interact with and devour some of Nurgle's essence, and then improve himself by it, is seen as not a threat or a danger to Nurgle or the family, but rather a representation that, together, working as one, they are capable of extending the power of Nurgle. Again, it's not an egotistical thing with Nurgle. It's about mercy and family. It's about giving out to others and providing to others without discipline, without judgment, without any level of expected reciprocity. And here's the interesting thing. It isn't like Kugath goes out and makes himself an big something. No, he's absolutely mortified. He wants to give Nurgle back the plague that he lost at the first possible opportunity. He wants to be reciprocal even though it's not expected of him. And it's just another example of how the mentality with Nurgle is very different from what people think it is. People have a very bad image of Nurgle a majority of the time, and the story of Kugath is often taken way out of context to try and prove a point, but this is, I think, how it should be interpreted correctly. So, on to the big one, Nurgle and his relationship with humanity. Now, this is a lot of text, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it off to you and stop when I need to say something specific. Things in humans that Nurgle respects or likes. Stubbornness, resilience, Those are two big ones. Again, Nurgle is not expecting you to go out and do something absolutely insane. He's not expecting you to make any changes. No change. We're not Zeech here. We don't want change. We want stoic. We want stubborn. We want resistant, not to him. You're not resisting Nurgle by being tough and resilient. You're not resisting Nurgle by just tanking it and accepting and head up, chin high against hardship. No, you're actually doing what he wants because that is the first step to accepting reality, to accepting and using the cycle. So stubbornness and resilience are great things that he loves to see out of humanity. The next one is seeking companionship. And this is another point that we talk about with Isha and with that whole mentality there. Seeking companionship and community in order to weather hardship. Essentially, the natural human emotion to group into herds, to gather and to help others to sustain difficulty or to weather hardship, is something that Nurgle massively approves of for two reasons. Well, on the one hand, it exposes more people to that hardship and extends the amount of people that his influence affects, including, spreading epidemic diseases in some cases. But the other thing that it does is it helps you to reach that level of resilience and stubbornness that can cause acceptance. If the entire community is afflicted with the same hardship, it is far easier for all of us to come together and support one another with the understanding that we're all going through something and that we can make it if we stick together. And that is a great example of how Nurgle uses the cycle to improve people. Because the eventual end goal of this is contentment and toughing it out. So being content with the idea of toughing it out. Not wanting to make a drastic change, form a different solution, or create some out-of-the-box way to solve or subvert the cycle of the hand that you've been dealt. That's the next step. That's acceptance. You're almost to the point of mercy. You want to go about this with Nurgle, not seeking to change the world, just to survive it better. Every day you get up, and the horrors persist, but by Nurgle, so do you. And with the help of your community, your family, there it is again. Your family, your community, your group that you are working with, you will survive it better, and each day you will get better and better at surviving it. Even as life gets harder, even as that disease gets more problematic, even as the side effects from your illness become more pronounced, you simply out-tough reality. And that's what impresses Nurgle. It's how insanely good humanity is at putting up with the hardships of life. And it's that hardship and that life and the acceptance of it that Nurgle wants to then provide to you and provide you more opportunities to show so that he can grant you his mercy, which is inurement to that pain. Things that Nurgle hates that humans do. The big one is wishing to totally escape the harshness of life. And that's a big one. A lot of people look at Nurgle, and especially the mercy part, and they think, well, why can't I just skip to the mercy? Why can't I just get immune to pain? If I say, oh, Lord Nurgle, I'm sorry, life really sucks right now, and I'm okay with it. Can I get my painless existence now? No. There's no quick way to mercy. There's no quick way to acceptance or to absolution. You don't have a swift road to the cycle. The cycle is constant, and the cycle repeats over and over again with no ending. And if you try to radically change or skip out on the cycle, or change yourself in a false way, that's what he hates. He hates the idea of falseness or skipping in such a way that it allows you to escape the cycles of life. So let's say that your job is an absolute slog and Nurgle is testing you by giving you a cold that day. And he's going to send you out, and what he wants you to do is go to work with a cold, tough it out, deal with it, and then come back, and tomorrow, instead of a cold, it'll be a flu. And he'll keep sending you out, and he expects you to meet every challenge with harsh, stubborn stoicism, and a willingness to push it out no matter how harsh the cycle gets. And as you do that, you'll realize that as the natural power of the human spirit, you are able to do so. What he doesn't want is you to take a sick day. Or even worse, once the illness goes away, to keep taking sick days so that the cycle gets easier for you. That's the exact opposite of what he wants. Now you're going backwards. You're reversing things. You're making things better for yourself, not by bettering yourself, but by skipping out on or removing yourself from the cycle of labor. That infuriates him because every day that you do that, it takes you further away from the mercy he's trying to give you, and it makes the path back to him that much harder every single time. So it sucks because you're distancing yourself from him in a way that's going to make it harder for you to ever achieve his mercy. And the other thing that he really hates is vindictiveness without the relief or mercy. So without intent for relief or mercy. People often say that Nurgle just wants to torture you until you feel bad enough to submit to him. That's not the point. It's not about submission. It's about acceptance. It's about saying, life sucks. I'll embrace it. I'll live anyway. I will be able to surpass this and survive it. And at that point, then you will get your relief or mercy. Vindictiveness, torture, hatred, murder, slicing off people's fingers, the type of stuff that the Drukhari do with no intention of letting you free or giving you a respectful, easy way out, of truly providing you with relief. That's what Nurgle hates. And this is another thing where people say, well, Nurgle must love the Imperium then, because the Imperium is all about suffering and hard cycles. No, because nothing in the Imperium has anything to do with relief or mercy. If you labor for 50 years in the mines in the Imperium, you don't get a massive retirement package that allows you to live in affluence. No, you still live in squalor and horror your whole life, and no matter if you're working or not, it simply is the difference between surviving and struggling to survive. There's no relief and mercy within that, it's simply vindictive suffering for your entire life. Now, Nurgle, he has an inherent mercy for you, waiting at the end of the road. And it's important to remember that as much as Nurgle does use suffering as a process of the cycle, Nurgle is not a god of suffering. Nurgle's not a god of pain. Nurgle's not a god of frustration or agony or disturbance in your daily life. Nurgle's a god of mercy. He simply has a process that he needs to go through in order to get you there using the cycle of everyday life for the most part. He's much lower intensity than the suffering of Slaanesh, or the suffering of Tzeentch, which is existential suffering, or the suffering of Khorne, which is slavery or death. It's a very slow burn, much like a disease or a fever. It is meant to ratchet up the resistance very slowly, allowing the human spirit to rise to the occasion and rise to the challenge in a way that the other gods do not permit. You either sink or swim with most of the other gods. With Nurgle, you're going to be treading water for a while, buddy. You better enjoy. And when you finally slip under the waves, there's your mercy, the forgiveness, the permission. And so we go into things that Nurgle asks you for. It's a very simple process, and it is a cycle like many of the other things that Nurgle loves. Suffer. That's the first step. Suffer. You can't be living easy for Nurgle to enter his way into your heart. You really can't be an upper hive spire noble and naturally come to worship Nurgle, because what suffering do you really experience? Unless you are diseased and inflicted, which of course is usually Nurgle's way to get to those people. You know, you might be like, well, if I'm comfortable and content in my life, Nurgle can't get to me. Yeah, try that when you have like stage 4 colon cancer. Or, I don't know, a disease that nobody can seem to cure that's making your eyes melt out of your head. There you go. Suffering provided free of charge. And the next step is very simple. Sink or swim over time. You will suffer, and you must persevere. What he requires from you is that you experience the suffering and the pain, and that you do not shy or shred away from it. You don't weaken and become vulnerable to trying to escape the cycle. You persevere. You remain stubborn and resilient to any level of difficulty. And of course, as that proceeds, pray for absolution. Beg for that suffering to continue and for you to become able to bear it better than you are now. And that is acceptance. You're not asking for the pain to go away. This is always the important thing. People say, Nurgle, inure me from pain, protect me from pain. I don't want to be in this agony anymore. That's not the point. The point with Nurgle is that you become enlightened to the understanding that this suffering is eternal. This suffering is going to be forever, no matter what. If I die, I will suffer. If I live, I will suffer. If I attempt to do anything, I will continue to suffer because life, as it is suffering. And as much as I'm able to survive it now, as much as I'm able to live, no matter how wretchedly, no matter how painfully, I need to understand that it's not going anywhere, no matter what I do. No matter what the gods do. So I am going to pray for absolution and not a cessation of suffering, but an acceptance of suffering. Thank you, Grandfather Nurgle, for providing me this understanding of suffering as a way of life. It will continue forever, and all that I pray for you to do is to absolve me of the things that go against you, so that I can proceed now worshiping you correctly. And then there it is, that moment of absolution where you truly do accept your life and the suffering that you've had thus far, and you are provided your gift. Well, what is your gift? Well, your gift is that skeleton tea direct from Isha. It is relief. It is mercy. It is the end. Oh, Lord, the end. The cycle finally doesn't stop. Doesn't get easier. You simply become immune to it because you're part of it now. You've been accepted into the cycle in the instant that you accept it. And Nurgle's mercy washes over you so fully and completely that one of the immediate reactions to Nurgle's mercy is laughter. And that's one of the most interesting things. Laughter. A belly laugh, a happy, joyful chuckle. That moment of understanding that this is what I was missing. This is what the suffering was separating me from. This is what my resistance to Nurgle, my resistance to the cycle, all these attempts to ease my life and my suffering and my perseverance, this is what it was separating me from. From this gift of mercy, from this gift of relief, of freedom, inurement to the pain. Not that it isn't there, not that I'm not grotesque and horrible, not that I'm not malformed and diseased and despairing, but that I simply don't feel it anymore. I might still be there. I still exist. I'm walking around, covered in pox, pus, boils, buboes, tumors, cancers, diseases, parasites. I'm still there. They're still there. But we're part of the cycle now. I'm not working against it anymore. No, me and Nurgle, we've reached an understanding, and his mercy could not taste sweeter. Of course, all that positivity, all that sweetness that's fresh in your life and your mind, what does your Lord want you to do now? Spread it to others. Fecundity. Production, reproduction, impressive amounts of expansion, spreading the word, the disease, the plague, exposing others to the cycle so that they too may experience this glorious gift that you've been given. Yeah, that's what Nurgle asks for you. That's not really that much to ask, is it? Spread the joy to others. So, with that understood, how do Nurgle cults form? Despair. That's almost always his narrow wedge. So despair is usually his in, so he finds people who are already despairing, but then it's also his method. Those people who weren't in despair, who were too high to be touched by suffering or by the cycle, he can make your life a whole lot worse before you accept it and it gets better again. And of course, those cults form in how far can you endure the cycle, and how much do you deserve and beg for mercy. We want to reach acceptance and absolution. You want to get your community to do that, and that's how cults form. If you have an entire community that's suffering from Nurgle's diseases, well, you better work together to find a way to prove that you are working with the cycle rather than against it. Else you're going to have to do this suffering thing for a whole lot longer of a time. The other thing is, even if it's not the acute suffering of disease, sometimes it's that long suffering that is life. People who work in a hard environment, in hardcore mining, or in soulless sweatshops for their entire life, that's a suffering of its own, and that draws people together into communities, and those communities are expressly created not necessarily to pull down the society that you're working for, but rather to make yourselves as a unit more capable of shouldering this pain and suffering, and to help each other out. It is a community format, and even though it may seek to change certain things about society, it's not doing it to escape society's suffering. A great example is a mining revolt wants to change how a religious holiday is celebrated or how much time they have off. It's not to make sure that they never work again or to give them all money and make them all rich. It's not for self-gain. No, it's so that they can do what they need to do. They can observe religious things. They can have a sense of community. They want something that is natural to the human experience and glorifies Nurgle as well, and helps them live through the suffering of existence. But in order to do that, some things have to change. And that's not to say that Nurgle hates all change. Of course, changes to the cycle that make the cycle easier are bad, but changes to the cycle that make the people within the cycle better able to withstand its grinding effects, that's a good thing. Don't go too out of line, but it's not bad either. Why would you join a cult of Nurgle then? Well, do you want to escape the cycle without changing yourself or the cycle? Does life suck? This will help you bear it more easily. So, what does it mean by not changing yourself? Because you are, of course, changing your outlook on life. It's not a physical change. Korn tells you to work out, get buff, be stronger than other people, and might makes right. Slaanesh tells you to get pretty, enjoy everything about life, and don't worry about the hard part. Hedonism, essentially. Zeech tells you to plan for extreme events and intend to get the absolute most out of your gambling addiction. Nurgle says, nope. It's a mental thing. It's a mental game. It's a part of you that things are going to get worse before they get better, and the worse is going to be me, but the better is also going to be me. The improvement is going to be through me, through my mercy that you will request. And if life sucks, this Nurglite cult will help you to bear it. It isn't necessarily going to make life easier. It isn't necessarily even going to make it easier for you to live life, because of course if they infect you with diseases, or they force you to commit to some sort of very difficult or impossible task, well, that's made life harder, hasn't it? But the point is not just to make life harder, it's to make you better able to appreciate and bear life's hardships. So what are Nurgle's gifts then? We've gone through the difficult things and the things that he asks for you to do. What are his actual gifts? Well, acid and other fluids are a very common one. Whether they're extruded from your body or carried in sacks upon your person doesn't seem to matter. Resistant strength is another one. Now, all of the gods produce strength in one form or another. Diabolic strength, whip-like strength, impossible strength, fractal strength. Nurgle is resistant strength. It is a very common thing within the, for example, the Death Guard, or within other Nurgle demons, that their grip strength, their tension strength, and their sheer weight is literally impossible. So people have noted many times how fighting a Plague Marine, they move very slowly, as they are fat, fecund zombies that are barely able to seemingly hold themselves together while also being incredibly durable. But once you get close to one, you realize that their reaction speed and their whip-like ability to move, as long as their weight, along with their weight and their grip strength, is equal to, if not better than, a majority of Astartes. And this, of course, applies with mortals as well. Things will change about you, your body, your physiology, and Nurgle, in many cases, is not aiming to increase your physical strength or prowess. He's intending to increase a certain portion of it. Usually it's things that are resistant strength related. And then the last part of his physical gifts are a distortion of the body designed to inure one to suffering. If you were suffering from some disease, like fatigue, a wasting disease, a fungal infection, etc., he's not going to take the infection away. Why would he? That's part of the cycle. He's going to make the infection 10 times worse, and then make your body a host for it, so that it can benefit from the cycle, rather than suffering from it. For example, this gentleman likely had some form of irritable bowel syndrome, and instead of him being very sick and having a bloated stomach, now his stomach is entirely filled with acidic pus, and he is, let's say, a little bit more rotund than one would expect. Often it is described that Nurgle's followers are like gas bags filled with infected and or decaying material that should kill a normal person, but doesn't for some reason, and the reason for that is because of this distortion of the body. Something about you that was negative and that you were suffering from now either becomes an unnatural equilibrium, or in some cases, becomes a strength for you. What about Nurgle's plagues, his most classic gifts? Well, the big thing here is that they are geared for slow killing and maximum annoyance and suffering. So again, we're not talking about something that entirely debilitates you and makes you unable to do anything. If you're unable to do anything, then you can't make any progress with that whole continuing to be part of the cycle while you're infected, now can you? But they are designed for being annoying. Incredibly annoying. It makes you want to give up. Nurgle makes the challenge hard. He makes you want, at every possible chance and turn, to forsake him and give up and just beg a doctor to take the pain away. I'm so tired of my fingernails itching every hour of the day. I keep ripping them off and I can't seem to get free of this ghastly itching that is happening all the time. God, I just wish I could get rid of it. But I can't. I have to stick with it. The suffering is good for me. The suffering will make me stronger. And that's the whole point. It's not designed to just instantly kill massive groups of people, though sometimes they are tweaked in order to do that, and of course, like any plague, it is not a perfect solution. But the real thing is that you want to infect the maximum number of people and get them suffering and towards that acceptance point before Nurgle unleashes his skeleton key, which, as mentioned, was created by Isha, effectively for Nurgle's use. Again, you can interpret that any way that you would like, but I consider it much more of a symbiotic relationship, where Isha is providing Nurgle with the skeleton key to his own plagues, because Nurgle intends to cure or modify his own plagues in the host once they have reached acceptance, and that skeleton key is part of his mercy. It's a very important part, of course, because that is the ultimate gift. And what about undeath as a force of Nurgle? Well, undeath is complicated when it comes to Nurgle. Nurgle is technically one of the only gods who has access to honest-to-God zombies in large portions in the form of poxwalkers, and also various other type of warp-afflicted, undead, quote-unquote, creatures. Now, a lot of the reference to the Death Guard, for example, or to other Nurgle cultists is that they look like zombies, or the Walking Dead. What's really true is actually kind of worse than that, to a degree. It's more like they are, or they would be dead if they hadn't achieved Nurgle's mercy. So as I mentioned, those distortions of the body designed to inure one to suffering often cause you to no longer have some human functions anymore. For example, this infected Ogren likely looks like a corpse and definitely smells like a corpse, and yet he is walking around, so it may give people the false impression that this is a zombie. This is not a zombie. This is a real person, a quote-unquote living Ogren. How is he living? God knows. Genuinely, actually, literally in this case, God knows. Nurgle being the god who knows. You could cut him open and do as many surgeries and autopsies as you'd like, and you couldn't explain how he's still alive. But he is still alive. He's still in there. He's still conscious to a greater or lesser degree, and he has not died. There's still a soul in there, no matter how black and infected and tainted it may be, it's still there. That's still a living human being. The exception to this being poxwalkers, but all other Nurgle mortals, and also immortals, important thing here, the Death Guard, while they may look undead, are technically still alive, somehow within there, and theoretically, like with a lot of the Chaos Gods, immortality is one of those gifts. So, undeath as a force of Nurgle is kind of a misnomer, because a lot of the things that we label as undead creatures are technically, horribly, somehow still alive, despite all physics. And it's usually because of warp corruption, or just the blessings of Nurgle. If you were suffering particularly horribly from diseases, the modifications and distortions to your body that would be required to inure you to the pain of life are going to be more extensive, and they're going to modify your physiology dramatically. The next one is physical manifestation of corruption. Now, there are a couple of obvious ones. Growing rot. Now, this could include literal gangrenous limbs that start to rot off. You could see this sister here and this sister here have started to take on corpse pallor, bloated or blighted flesh in certain areas, as well as these gentlemen who appear to be necrosising from their skin, and of course the rampant cancer that is connecting this man's stomach to his other hand. But this growing rot is, again, more of a cosmetic thing than it is a change to your body. Manifesting flies is another one, and while there are examples where you would just see someone who is like this gentleman, who's relatively disgusting and is producing flies via the more traditional methods of maggots being lodged in places that I don't want to think about at the moment, you also have a much more arcane version of this, which you have here. Hosts of hives. The best example of hosts of hives is actually from the Death Guard, which is Typhus. Callus Typhon is the host of the Destroyer Hive, a host of his own disease, but also of massive hordes of actual demonic flies that live within his armor and within his flesh. So, literally becoming a host for flies. And the last one, and let's be honest, the one that we all know about Nurgle, is ghoulish scent. The smell of Nurgle, which is almost as famous as any other of his blessings, and it is a mix of scents. Active rot is pretty much the prevailing one from a majority of Nurgle worshippers. Active rot, flesh putrefying, teeth rotting, gums beginning to become infected and pus-filled, various portions and pieces of your anatomy beginning to necrosize and rot off of you in a way that is quite distressing to the human nose, because we are particularly tweaked to find decaying human flesh incredibly disgusting. The Nurgleites have absolutely no such problems because, well, again, once you've accepted the cycle and become one with it, you certainly aren't worried about things like a bad smell, now are you? And the other one is dry rot. Dry rot is something that tends to come around with Nurgle or Neglish corruption, depending on how you pronounce that word. I like both. The dry rot of corruption is usually related to ambient Neglish magic, specifically with ritualism a lot of the time. It has a mix of like what you would imagine an old forest smelling like, very loamy and heavy on the soft rot side of things. But the worshippers themselves, unless they are quite old, tend to smell like active decay, which is quite foul in many cases. Finally, the corruption of people, animals, and the corruption of items. For people and animals, remember, flies, a lot of the time, it's flies. Flies follow around a lot of the worshippers of Nurgle. The single eye and the treble eye. So either 3 eyes, 1 in the middle of the forehead and 2 where they normally are,
or the single eye, a single monocular eye, either from one being consumed by a corruption or by it moving to the center of the eye or the center of the forehead, and the other two being removed, similar to a plague bearer. Another common one is the wide mouth with the tongue. Often this includes like ancillary mouths or extended mouths from the stomach to the torso to sections of armor, like you can see with this Sister of Battle. Also very common, which is also referred to as the Great Maw. And another common one is horns. Whether it's a singular horn, various shoulder horns, or back horns like insects or bugs, you can consider this almost like another element of fecundity, this single poking horn extending from your physiology. And the last one is, again, fecundity, is the production of moss, diseased growths, boils, anything that is rotting or decaying on the body is going to have something feeding off of it in a symbiotic relationship. If you have skin that is necrosizing, over time it will begin to grow mold. And that mold will possibly be feasted upon by other creatures. Those creatures will then die or be preyed upon by other creatures, and your, floral biome of your body becomes a lot more active when you have extreme Nurgle corruption. And with the corruption of items, it's very simple. Rust. Rust is the main one. The decay of physical objects, the change of things as if they had been developing a certain level of time beyond what they actually were. Growth. Another common one is untainted and unrestrained growth, whether that is your gut becoming corpulent and large, growing a double chin, becoming much larger in size and yet not more lithe or powerful, simply more bulky. If you're on that massive bulk, it's often that chaos juice of Nurgle. And also with objects and items, you'll notice that a lot of Nurgle individuals tend to favor large weapons, whether it's cleavers or axes or clubs. A lot of the Nurgle enhanced or enchanted weapons are just big, very big, and in conjunction with that growth also comes weight. Whether that is the weight of your person becoming far more corpulent, it also includes the weight of objects, whether that is your weapons, your equipment, etc., increasing in size. And that often combines with the resistant strength of Nurgle. You may have a weapon that is far too heavy for you to actually use elegantly and effectively, but combined with your increased resistive strength, you can almost pull off an Escanor, Lion Sin of Pride, and carry up a massive weapon, and you only need to swing it once because you are so gosh darn powerful on the downstroke that anyone who tries to resist you in a solid block is going to get chopped in half, or at least break their collarbone. So, again, it's a complicated thing. Corruption in its many flavors are something that I'm going to go over in another video, but yeah, just a primer for it here. God, I love all the Isha and Nurgle in the kitchen stuff, but here you have Gordon Ramsay, Isha, and Kiss the Cook, Nurgle. Again, this is going to be the start of a new series. Technically, it already started, but I am extending it here. I will be doing one of these for each of the gods, going into the various theories around their creation, following a similar trend with many of the things that I've started here, splitting them up, comparing them, and then I will also be doing detailed breakdowns of other things in the realms of chaos and related to chaos. Most specifically, I'll be doing individual videos for different types of cults, how they organize, what they might organize by, examples of cults that already exist, not like the lore accurate cults, but being like, here is an example of how a cult could begin on X or Y world. Here is why they would believe this. Here is how they would likely end up. And the various things of that type. I'll also be doing them for generic chaos, chaos undivided, and possibly going over the legions in the modern day as well. But that's going to be up to you guys. As I said, we're getting into experimental territory. Brand new series. So I would really love your input. I'm going to be coming up with more and more videos as we go on. But for right now, I'm going to put up our next couple videos, our next votes, and I will wish you all a lovely good night.